it's money not spent. And money not spent leads to lower aggregate demand. And today, with the world facing an insufficiency of global aggregate demand, that's a problem. Well, there's some hope that American consumers will return, but that would be a mistake because that would not be sustainable. As I mentioned before, savings rate was 0. The goal should be to prevent the emergence of another bubble through better financial regulation. Just to go, because I'm running out of time, the bill passed by the U.S. Congress, just to give you my grade, I know I shouldn't be grading the U.S. Congress, but anyway, couldn't help, a B minus. The Wall Street Journal had an article where they talked to a large number of economists. Somebody might say that's a little bit of grade inflation, giving it a B minus. Well, I don't know. Anyway, we can talk about that in the question period. I want to say just a minute about global imbalances and global reserves. There's long been a worry that the disorderly unwinding of the imbalances would lead to global crisis. It didn't lead to this current crisis, but would contribute, could contribute to the next. The basic problem is that some countries are producing more than they are consuming and contributing to weak global aggregate demand. The response of the G20 was for the U.S. to consume less and China to consume more, I think is not the right approach, mainly because the world cannot survive if everyone consumes in a profligate manner as the U.S. Just the planet can't survive. What is needed is a new economic model focusing on saving resources, investments to respond to the challenges of global warming and poverty, and a new global reserve system, a new global regulatory system. Let me, if we have time in the question, we'll deal with that. But let me turn to the big picture, which is that, to put it bluntly, markets failed miserably, and we are all paying a very high price. Government came to the rescue, but in ways that were not as effective as they could have been and left a legacy of debt. The choices many governments are making today are likely to make the global downturn last longer, possibly much longer, than if they had engaged in alternative policies. There were alternatives. There were alternative ways of bailing out the banks, of dealing with the financial crisis. There were alternatives that would have stimulated the economy more and left less of a legacy of debt. And even today, there are alternatives that can set the global economy on a course for a return to a stronger recovery and a more stable future. One of the things I wanted to mention just very briefly is that while we've been focusing on the short run, the long run problems have not gone away, but the resources available to deal with them have been greatly diminished. One of the aspects of these alternative strategies is that we could have combined a focus on the long run and the short run. There are strategies for dealing with the short-run problems that will simultaneously address the long run. An example is investments to deal with global warming. Success in dealing with both will require getting a better sense of the appropriate balance between markets and the government. A short way of summarizing what went wrong in the years before the crisis was that we lost the balance in the run-up to the crisis, and now is the time to restore it. Thank you.
Thanks very much for a very insightful presentation. We have about 15 minutes for questions. And so I just want to run through some of the House procedures. We have lots of people here tonight and only a short amount of time. So the economists here will understand what the issues are. So we might not all have the chance to ask a question. So I ask for your understanding if you do not have a chance to ask a question. The microphone handlers will decide, will ask the questions. What I'm going to ask you to do is please put your hand up to get the microphone handler's attention. Once you have been chosen, then I'm going to ask you to please stand and identify yourself so that Professor Stiglitz can see you. The light here is quite bright, so if you could just perhaps stand up and wave so that we can find you, it would be greatly appreciated. And I ask you to just ask only one question. And please note that this lecture is being recorded. Thank you. And that'll be it.
Hello, Mr. Stiglitz. My name is Jan Picullis. I'm the State Secretary for the Citizens Electoral Council of Australia. And you have tonight mentioned a lot about monetary theory, and there's been a warning from Lyndon LaRouche for decades proposing a new global financial architecture, as Bill Clinton did in 1998. He's proposing a global Glass-Steagall, a return to FDR's policy that separated the speculation from the productive savings and the things that businesses require, like legitimate forms of banking, so that the bankers couldn't speculate on people's money, which led to the Great Depression. So that was also he's also called for a new Bretton Woods new global financial system, a credit system, a return to the American system of political economy. Under, like Alexander Hamilton, isn't that something that you should support?
Yeah. I'm very strongly, let me say, when I was in the Clinton administration, I opposed the repeal of the Glass-Steagall, and while I was chairman, it didn't get repealed. The reason I opposed it, reasons, there were actually several. One, I thought that the repeal would open up all kinds of conflicts of interest that became manifest in the scandals that marked the beginning of this decade, the Enron scandal, the WorldCom scandal, conflicts of interest that are just rampant. Secondly, I worried that the kind of risk-taking gambling that marked the investment banks was really different from the kind of culture that you want in the commercial banks that are assigned the task of providing credit to which you want to entrust your money when you put a deposit. And thirdly, I worry that it would lead to larger and larger banks that were too big to fail. And the problem with too big to fail banks is that if they're too big to fail, then they know that they have a one-way bet. If they bet and win, they can keep their profits. They bet and lose, the taxpayer comes in and fills the gap. All three of these problems were manifest in the years after. The size of the concentration of the American banking system increased enormously in the 10 years afterwards. It's not a surprise that the one bank that lobbied hardest for the repeal of the Glass-Steagall was Citibank. And it was the one bank that got perhaps the most money of all the banks, or certainly one of the most. And the risk-taking culture has also been obviously a problem. In the regulatory reform discussions in the United States, Paul Volcker, who I referred to earlier, former chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, came out in favor of what came to be called the Volcker Rule, which was a modern version of Glass-Steagall. It's hard to go back to the kinds of regulatory structures you had in the 30s, but it was a proposal that would restrict the extent of risk-taking, of gambling on the part of banks, and was meant to be a restoration. And a version of the Volcker Rule was included in the regulatory reform bill that was passed by the U.S. Congress, but the problem with that regulatory bill is that there were a larger number of exceptions, so the full force of what Volcker had intended has been greatly weakened by the version that has been passed by the US Congress.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Ben from the Philippines. With regards to deficits, it's not just with the IMF that we're having problems with, but with international credit rating agencies. They say that our deficits are structural, therefore we have to go austere, and then otherwise they'll downgrade us. So how do we handle these credit rating agencies who, in the first place, have a big hand in the GFC?
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I find a great mystery about the crisis is how people, institutions that should have been thoroughly discredited by the crisis seem unembarrassed to still have views. And that's true of some central bankers that I described before who were at the helm as they drove the economy into the brink and then say, oh, look how I've saved you. The credit rating agencies' record was phenomenal, phenomenally bad. But it's not the first time. In the East Asia crisis, the credit rating agencies didn't downgrade, for instance, Thailand until days before the crisis. They had they were encouraging the flow of capital, hot money into the region, and then all of a sudden they changed their mind, and it played a big role in precipitating the crisis. They believed, in the case of the United States, going back to the securitization, they believed in what I call financial alchemy, that somehow they could transform these subprime F-rated mortgages by financial alchemy into A-rated securities that could be held by a pension fund. The fact that they're willing to show their face in public now is remarkable, as I said. But the difficulty countries face is they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. And that's been illustrated so clearly by Spain. Spain was under pressure of the kind you described to cut its deficit. And in response to that, it raised taxes and cut expenditures. The next day, Fitch's, one of the main rating agencies, one of the three, cut Spain's rating. Why? Not because they believed that it wasn't going to do it, because they believed it was going to do it. And as it did it, if it cut expenditures and raised taxes, the growth would slow down, and with growth slowing down, tax revenues will go down. Tax revenues go down, your deficit is going to get up. So you're caught either way. So the lessons for that is do the right thing. And that means stimulate your economy. But in ways that I try to explain, there are ways you can stimulate the economy more effectively and reduce the deficit in the long run. And the second one is don't rely on foreign capital. Try to get your savings rate up so that you don't have to rely on the foreign rating agencies, because you then become subject to this kind of tyranny, which makes it very hard to have good economic policies.
Professor Stiglitz, Richard Sanders, ecological economist. In terms of, I just wanted to sort of suggest another angle here in terms of how we might respond to this. It seems to me that the financial system is essentially a pyramid scheme, fractional reserve banking, if you like.